My husband laughed in my face as he handed me divorce papers, called me useless wife. I didn't say a word. 3 months later, he called 20 times a day. When I finally answered, my husband, James, my partner of 15 years, handed me divorce papers on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry in the living room, feeling content with the familiar rhythm of housework, when I heard the door open. He was home early, which was unusual. There was a time when the sound of his footsteps created little tremors in my chest, feelings of eagerness, anticipation. But that was before everything changed. "What are you doing?" James asked, his voice carrying something I didn't recognize then, a childlike excitement, as if he was keeping a secret he couldn't wait to reveal. "Folding clothes," I replied, shrugging. "You're home early." James didn't answer. Instead, he set his leather briefcase on the floor, the expensive one I'd given him for our anniversary last year, and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I remember pausing over a pile of laundry, his favorite cashmere sweater still in my lap. The sweater I had saved for 4 months to buy him for his birthday. "I was going to wait until the weekend," he said, his mouth curving into a smile I'd never seen before, a cruel smile, a victorious smile. "But since you're here..." He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table, landing on a home design magazine we had bought together last month when planning to redecorate the living room. "Here you go." I knew what it was before I opened it. There was a strange clarity in that moment, as if part of me had seen this coming. I picked up the envelope, carefully opened it, and stared at the words divorce papers boldly printed at the top. "You're leaving me," I said quietly, not a question but a statement. James laughed. Not an uncomfortable or uneasy laugh, but a happy one, genuinely pleased. The sound cut through me like a knife. "My lawyer says this is a generous offer," he said, his voice eager like a child showing off an achievement. "Considering you've barely contributed anything to this marriage." Barely contributed anything? 15 years of my life had been considered barely anything? Looking back now, the signs were there, flashing like warning lights that I deliberately ignored. You never want to believe that the person you've built your entire life with could change so much, or perhaps they were always that way and you chose not to see it. 8 months ago, James suddenly developed a strong interest in working out. He would wake up at 4:30 a.m., put on his new Lululemon gym clothes, that we couldn't afford, and drive to the F45 gym before I even heard my first alarm. "You should come with me," he said, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, admiring his newly developing muscles. "It's a great community." "I can't get up at 4:30 a.m., I laughed, watching him through the mirror's reflection. "Besides, we can't both afford F45 memberships." He shrugged slightly. "I mean, you could try, right? Take care of yourself a little?" I remember how those words felt, a small jab, the beginning of a larger wound that would open over the coming months. "I do take care of myself," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "I just do it at normal hours." He bought me a Peloton for Christmas, an outrageously extravagant gift that I had objected to when I saw the price. "James, we can't afford this," I said, staring at the expensive machine in our living room. "I want you to keep up," he said, with a smile that at the time I thought was sweet. "We're not getting any younger, you know." Each week after that, he would comment on how rarely I used it, reminding me of the cost, of the waste it represented. I didn't realize he was planting a seed, that I didn't appreciate what he did for me, that I was ungrateful. Then came the late nights at the office. He started coming home later and later, talking about client meetings and new projects that always seemed to require his presence in the evening. "We do business with people on the West Coast," he explained unnecessarily. "Time zones, you know." I had worked in business long enough to know about time zones. I had once had a career of my own before setting it aside to support his, because he said his job had to be the priority. Then came the text messages, ones he would always hurry to hide when I walked into the room. He had become secretive with his phone, always face down, password changed from my birthday to a random string of numbers I didn't know. "It's a work requirement," he had explained when I casually remarked on it. "Data security and all that." There was strange perfume on his shirt collars, a scent I didn't recognize, which he claimed was a free sample from Sephora. James had never set foot in Sephora in his life. And then there were the comments about my appearance, subtle remarks, gradual suggestions that began to erode my confidence. "Have you tried that new serum? The one everyone on TikTok is talking about? Kevin's girlfriend just got Botox. She looks at least 10 years younger than you. Have you thought about changing your hair color? This one makes you look tired." I took care of myself, always had. I just wasn't interested in spending hundreds of dollars on La Mer cream or whatever was trending on Instagram. I was a twice-a-day face wash with drugstore cleanser and beeswax kind of person. I had wrinkles, laugh lines from 36 years of living on this planet. They didn't make me ugly. At least, I hadn't thought so. Until James started pointing them out. A week before he handed me divorce papers, I found a receipt. I wasn't the snooping type. I wasn't the wife who checked her husband's pockets. But I was doing laundry, as I did every week, and while emptying his pants pockets, I found a small piece of paper, light blue. Tiffany and Company. We weren't rich. We shopped at Target and drove a 2018 Honda. A Tiffany receipt didn't belong in our lives. It was like finding a celebrity's autograph in your jeans pocket, completely out of place, completely unexplainable. What is this? I asked myself, staring at the figure at the bottom, $2,835. Nearly $3,000. At Tiffany's. My heart beat faster as I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. Why hadn't I checked it more regularly? Finance management had become James's job in recent years, as he gently took over the task, saying he had a head for numbers. What I saw made me feel as if the floor had fallen out from beneath me. Small, unsuspicious transactions, $200 here, $300 there, transferred to an unknown account. The savings we had built over the past 6 years, our future home down payment, had decreased from over $45,000 to just $8,723. I felt sick. I felt cold. And a part of me knew, in that moment, that it was over. I just had to wait until that evening for James to come home, to confirm what I already knew. Aurora, James said the name with a smile on his face, as if he were sharing good news. My new girlfriend is Aurora. I sat on the couch, divorce papers in my lap. I hadn't cried. In fact, I was too shocked to have any reaction at all. She's a fitness influencer, he continued, his voice full of pride. She has 50,000 followers on Instagram and growing. I met her at F45. He talked about her as if he was reading a job profile. Aurora was 27, nearly 10 years younger than me. She was ambitious, unlike me, and she really takes care of herself, the clear implication being that I didn't. It turned out, he had been sleeping with her for 6 months. I know this is hard, he said, almost seeming kind for a second. But you'll be fine. When were you going to tell me? I finally asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. James shrugged. Not sure. I've been planning this for a while, but it's complicated. Complicated. He had cheated, stolen our savings, and planned to leave me, and he called it complicated. I've got an apartment with her, he continued, still with that same smug tone. One of the new complexes downtown. Moving my stuff won't take long. Won't take long. Because he had planned it. Because he had thought of every detail while I was still folding his clothes and trying to understand why my husband didn't seem to like me anymore. The receipt from Tiffany's, I said, my hand tightening around the paper. That was a gift for her. A promise ring, he nodded, then frowned. You went through my pockets. I was doing laundry, I replied, suddenly feeling exhausted, down to my bones. Like I always do. James was silent for a moment, then sighed as if he was the injured party in this scenario. I was going to do this more humanely, he said. Really, this is your fault for finding the receipt. I could only stare at him. Was he really blaming me? For the fact that he had cheated, stolen, and planned to leave me? Would it have been more humane if he had just suddenly disappeared with all our savings? Let's be real, he said, his voice suddenly hard. You can barely figure out the Netflix app without my help. You'll be calling me within a week begging to patch things up. Was I really that technologically challenged? No. I just let him control the Roku remote because he liked the feeling of mastering it. I let him set up the Wi-Fi because it made him feel useful. I let him handle software updates because it made him happy. And now, after 15 years of small sacrifices and concessions, he was using them as evidence of my inadequacy. I'm actually doing you a favor, he said, his voice like a teacher speaking to a student who didn't understand the lesson. Teaching you to finally grow up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there watching him pack his bags with all his expensive new clothes, which I now realized were purchased with our savings, probably to impress Aurora. He took the iPad, the gaming console, and even the good coffee maker we had bought together for our 10th anniversary. He left the cheap one, the one we kept in the cabinet in case the other broke. I'll be in touch about the paperwork, he said as he left, standing at the door with 2 large suitcases. He looked around the house, almost nostalgically, his eyes lingering on the signs of 15 years together, the photo we took in the Caribbean, the small collection of rocks we had gathered on our first hike, a blanket my grandmother had knitted for our wedding. There was a moment, just a second, when I wondered if he was reconsidering. If there was a flash of regret. And then he smiled, that smile again, the victorious one, and closed the door behind him. In the profound silence that followed, I didn't do what women in movies usually do. I didn't tear up our photos, or throw his clothes on the lawn, or call friends to sob hysterically. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching. Taking a deep breath, I began checking every financial account we had, taking screenshots of suspicious transactions, downloading statements, and creating a detailed record of James's financial betrayal. I found transactions from January, innocuously labeled as car maintenance or home repairs, small, unsuspicious expenses that I wouldn't even think to question. I found credit card statements for restaurants we'd never visited together, and hotels I'd never been to. I even found the Venmo history, where he had sent money to AK Aurora Kang, I guessed, with heart emojis and fire emojis. Eventually, I called my sister, Vivian. "I need you to come over," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "James is gone. He has someone else." Vivian didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't do anything until I get there." And I didn't do anything. I just sat on the couch in the strangely quiet house, wondering how my life could change so completely in one afternoon. Vivian stayed with me that night, helping me organize paperwork and make lists. "This is classic financial abuse," she said, her voice hard. Vivian worked at a bank and knew what to look for. "He's been planning this for months. He deliberately concealed these transactions, and deliberately built an escape fund." Financial abuse seemed too dramatic to me at the time. This was James, my husband, the man I had shared a bed and table with for 15 years. But the numbers didn't lie. The truth was that he had stolen from me. From our future. From what should have been ours. "You need to call a divorce lawyer," Vivian said. "Now. Like, tomorrow morning." I did, calling and making an appointment. I also locked our joint credit cards, something I knew how to do from a TikTok video I had casually watched a month before. It was rather ironic to think that James had called me technologically inept. My phone rang for the first time about 6 hours after James left. His name flashed on the screen, and I didn't answer. It rang again 30 minutes later. And again. And again. By late evening, I had 14 missed calls from him. By morning, the number had risen to 23. The first voicemail was angry. "I can't believe you locked the credit cards. You have no right to do that. Call me back right now." The second was threatening. "If you don't unlock the cards, I'll have my lawyer know about this financial sabotage. I guess you're not as dumb as I thought." By the 10th call, his tone had changed. "Look, you're very angry, I get it. But let's talk about this rationally. We're adults. There are things that need to be handled." Why was I suddenly smart enough to rationally handle things with him when just days ago he thought I was too stupid to manage on my own? "Don't call him back," Vivian warned when I finally checked these messages. "Nothing good will come of it. Let your lawyer talk." After a week at Vivian's, sleeping on her couch, she had a child, and the guest room had turned into a playroom, I started to understand the full picture of how James had deceived me. The first reality check came when I tried to order something on Amazon, just a few essentials, and my credit card was declined for a $30 transaction. I called the bank, and that's when the truth started to emerge. "Your checking account is virtually empty," the woman said gently. "There's only $42.17 left." "That can't be," I gasped, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. "I deposited nearly $1,000 at the beginning of the month, my paycheck." "Yes, I see that deposit," she replied. "And I also see a transfer out of $850 2 days later, to another account. Authorized by the joint account holder, James Bennett." James had withdrawn my paycheck, and worse, he had done this before he even decided to leave me. He had planned this. He had been draining it bit by bit, not in large amounts that would catch my attention, but in regular transfers of $200, $300 happening every few weeks, always labeled as car maintenance or home repairs. Basic things I wouldn't question. I felt so stupid. I was someone who believed marriage should be built on trust. We had separate accounts since we got married, that was his idea, he said it was more practical. But I had trusted him with our joint savings. That's where most of my salary went, building our future, as he used to call it. While going through our joint paperwork, I was surprised to discover how much stuff you accumulate in 15 years. I found receipts from places I'd never been, a coffee shop near her apartment, movie tickets from dates I wasn't on, receipts from clothing stores for items I'd never seen James wear, probably gifts for Aurora. He hadn't even tried to hide them, Just stuffed them into the drawer with all our other paperwork, as if he knew I would never look, or worse, as if he didn't care if I found them. The strangest thing happened at Walmart, when I was buying some basics, toothpaste, shampoo, essentials that James hadn't given me time to pack in the whirlwind of his departure. I bumped into James's cousin, Motto. Instead of feeling awkward as I expected, Motto actually approached me. "Hey, Anna," he called, his face showing genuine concern. "I heard about what happened. James is a jerk." I could only stand there, clutching my basket, confused by his reaction. "Thanks, I guess?" I said, not sure how to respond. "No, really," Motto insisted. "He did similar things to his high school girlfriend." I should have said something 15 years ago. I stood there, in the aisle of Walmart, feeling as if the world was tilting. This wasn't a new development. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was who he was. "What did he do to her?" I asked, not sure I really wanted to hear the answer. "He went to college, met a new girl, and then told his old girlfriend she wasn't good enough," Motto said, shaking his head. "Blamed her for everything, made her feel terrible about herself, then broke up with her over the phone." Motto helped me pick out an inexpensive printer for scanning documents, telling me I would need it for the divorce proceedings. He also gave me the number of the lawyer who had helped his sister in her divorce. "It'll be okay," he said as we parted. "Anna, I know you don't believe that right now, but it will be okay." That was the first time I actually felt like maybe it would be. Meanwhile, James continued calling, less frequently than in those first days, dropping to about 5 or 6 times a day. The messages had shifted from anger to strange concern. "I'm just worried about how you're handling the bills," he texted, as if I hadn't been paying my own phone bill this entire time. And then there was a message from Aurora, via Facebook, simply, "We should talk sometime." I didn't reply to her. There was nothing to say. She knew he was married. She wasn't an innocent victim in this. The first meeting with the divorce lawyer, a woman named Janet whom I found through a women's support group on Facebook, revealed more troubling truths. "He's hiding assets," Janet said, looking through the documents I had brought. "And we need to act quickly to prevent him from hiding more." She looked through the bank transactions, pausing at the recurring transfers. "This is a classic example of financial abuse," she said, her voice serious. "He knew he wanted to leave and has been quietly taking money for months, perhaps even longer. We need to look at both of your credit reports to see if there are any accounts he might have opened that you don't know about." I followed her advice, and it only took a few hours to uncover the next truth. That's when I logged into our old shared email account, the one we had set up years ago to receive notifications from Netflix and our other streaming services. There, in the inbox, was a confirmation email for a credit card I had never known about, not a high limit one or anything, just a basic Capital One card with a $3,000 limit, but he had been using it for months, mostly at restaurants and gas stations near his new apartment. It seemed his precious Aurora liked to be taken on dates, and he was spending more than his income to maintain her illusion of him. And then there was something that made me chuckle, charges for Planet Fitness. He had told me he was going to that expensive F45. I wondered if Aurora knew her boyfriend wasn't actually a member of the fancy gym where they had met. I opened a separate bank account, just a basic checking account at Chase. The woman at the bank was extremely helpful, patiently walking me through the steps, showing me how to use their app and everything. Maybe James believed I was a technological idiot, but I should have understood how online bank accounts worked years ago. "None of this is complicated," she said, smiling at me. "I think sometimes people like to make it seem more complicated than it is to maintain control." She didn't know anything about my situation, but her words hit too close to home. That's exactly what James had done, had always done. He had always said that money was complicated, or technology was too difficult for me. It wasn't because I couldn't understand. It was because he wanted to make sure I didn't try. And then, oh my goodness, wait until I discovered the real reason James always insisted on handling the Netflix account. When I logged in, I saw it immediately, a profile named J&A. James and Aurora. With their own viewing history, set up months ago. They had watched Bridgerton together. That was my favorite show, and James had always complained it was too romantic, too dramatic. Apparently he didn't think it was too romantic when watching with Aurora. To sustain myself and pay for my lawyer, I found a job at a local company, nothing special, just basic customer service work, $16 an hour. But here's the most coincidental thing. The company's office was in the same building as one of James's biggest clients, the ones he was always trying to impress. I hadn't planned this. I had just found the job on Indeed and applied. But fate has an interesting way of arranging things. On my first day at work, Who did I meet in the elevator but guess who? James, wearing his important meeting suit, the one I knew he had maxed out our Nordstrom card to buy, with Aurora tagging along beside him, looking like a lost puppy in a too tight dress and too high heels for a professional office environment. The look on James's face when he saw me was priceless. He went pale, then red, then pale again. He stood there, mouth agape, while I just smiled and said, "Hi, James. Good luck with your meeting." Aurora stood there, clearly trying to understand the relationship between James and me. She must not have known who I was because I didn't look like any photos James might have shown her. In the final months of our marriage, I had cut my hair short and dyed it darker, changes that James hated. I think we should go," he finally said to Aurora, trying to steer her out of the elevator as it stopped on the 7th floor. That wasn't anyone's floor. "But the meeting isn't at," she began. "We'll take a different elevator," he cut her off, pushing her through the door. I just stood there, back straight, watching them leave. And then I smiled. Not a vindictive smile. Just a smile of relief. Because in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to go back to my old life. I didn't want to go back to James. He was right about one thing: I had survived without him. And I was doing better for it. My new job, though just temporary, brought me unexpected joy. My new manager, Matthew, actually liked my attention to detail, had asked me to help organize some spreadsheets for the office. I hadn't used Excel in years, but I found tutorials on YouTube and retaught myself. And then I applied those same skills to organize all the evidence of James's financial wrongdoings. I didn't have to do anything dramatic, simply identify what had once been our joint money, document where it had gone, and provide all this information to Janet, my lawyer. "This is perfect," she had said, smiling as she looked through my documents. "We won't even need to hire a forensic accountant." James found out about this in our first mediation meeting. He had shown up with his familiar confidence, probably expecting me to be a mess. Instead, he walked into a room where I had printed out copies of every shady transaction he had made in the past year, including charges from hotels near Aurora's apartment that he had claimed were business meetings. His face. Oh, his face. His jaw dropped as the mediator began going through the evidence. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to understand how the wife who supposedly couldn't read Swift codes or set up a home display system could produce such a detailed financial report. "I don't know what she's talking about," he finally said, trying to seem calm. "This is completely fabricated." James, the mediator, an older woman named Eleanor, replied with a serious voice, "These appear to be actual bank statements, with transfers highlighted. Can you explain these transactions?" He started stammering, trying to come up with a plausible explanation for why he had been transferring funds from our joint savings account to pay for dinners and weekends away with another woman. "These are business expenses," he insisted. I told Anna I was working on those days. "Including 16 nights at the Hyatt downtown?" Eleanor asked, raising an eyebrow. "A hotel that's a 10-minute walk from your new apartment?" James sat in silence, his face hardened in absolute discomfort. That was the moment I knew everything would be okay. But I had one final card to play. "By the way," I said, my voice strangely calm, "I logged into the Peloton account that you bought me for Christmas, the one you always reminded me I never used." James looked at me, his eyes a bit wider. "It seems you and Aurora used it together at our house on days I visited my sister," I continued, sliding the printed activity log across the table. "I see 2 profiles, Jimbo 99 and Aurora Fit, logged in multiple times over the past 2 months. Both profiles were created on the same day, a week after my first visit to Vivian's in January. Quite coincidental." James actually sputtered as he tried to explain that one. Eleanor seemed to be trying very hard not to laugh, and the mediation continued on a path very favorable to me. Karma really started hitting when Aurora finally realized James wasn't as wealthy as he had pretended. Apparently, she discovered that he was still making payments on that Tiffany promise ring, which, by the way, wasn't actually from Tiffany's. How do I know this? Aurora, in a magnificent act of revenge, messaged me on Instagram. Not the usual "we need to talk" type, but a series of screenshots, lots of screenshots. Messages where James promised to buy her a car, with what money? Conversations about moving to a luxury apartment he certainly couldn't afford, and even some choice comments about me. "I think you should see who he really is," she wrote. "I don't want to be part of his lies anymore." I didn't reply, just forwarded everything to my lawyer. Professional revenge is so much better than drama. The best thing, James's mother called me. "Anna?" she said when I answered, her voice gentle. "This is Evelyn, James's mother." "Yes, I know," I replied, suddenly feeling the walls close in around me. She had always taken James's side in every argument. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, surprising me. About how James has treated you all these years. And about how he's behaving now. My heart clenched. In 15 years, Evelyn had never acknowledged that her son could be wrong. He got fired, she said, dropping the next bombshell. Not because of you. Apparently, he had been inflating expense reports for months. All those fancy dates with that girl, he had been charging them to the company card. I almost laughed. Of course he had. James hadn't just stolen from me, but from his company too. He truly believed he was smarter than everyone, completely uncatchable. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied sincerely, because despite everything, I didn't want James to fail. I just wanted justice. Don't be, Evelyn said, a slight smile heard in her voice. I'm just calling to say that I've been watching all of this and you deserve better. I should have seen this long ago. After hanging up, I sat there for a moment, holding the phone. I hadn't expected her to take my side. It was a small victory, insignificant to an outsider, but to me, it meant a great deal. I won't lie, part of me wanted to post all of this on Facebook. I wanted to share the screenshots, make James feel as humiliated as when he called me useless. But you know what? I didn't need to. He was doing a perfect job of destroying his own reputation. Instead, I focused on making my small new studio apartment feel like home. I bought some plants from Home Depot. They're still alive, almost a month now. I figured out how to install my TV myself, thanks to YouTube. And I even started learning to cook properly. Turns out I wasn't actually hopeless in the kitchen as James had always said. I just needed some guidance and time to experiment. The best revenge? When James created yet another Instagram account to message me, I didn't even feel angry. I just marked it as spam and went back to watching my YouTube cooking tutorial. It might have been my first lamb dish, slightly burned, but it was mine. I made it. Last month, more than 3 months after James left, I was buying coffee at Starbucks before work, and I overheard 2 people at the next table talking about someone who got caught charging personal expenses to a company account. I didn't think much of it until I heard James's name. Turns out, he hadn't just charged his dates with Aurora to the company card, but had been running this scheme at his last 3 jobs. How do I know? Because Aurora, of all people, had started talking, and not just to me, to everyone. After James got fired, he couldn't keep up with all the promises he'd made to her. No more fancy dinners at the Cheesecake Factory, indeed, that was her definition of fancy, no more shopping trips to Lululemon, no more weekend getaways to nearby cities. The final straw, he couldn't make the payments on that fake Tiffany ring anymore. Yes, still can't believe he bought a knockoff. I had seen the receipt, it was from one of those Tiffany-like websites. Aurora wasn't just angry, she became methodical. Remember all those fake expense reports James had made? She had screenshots, lots of them. Apparently, he had bragged to her about how clever he was, showing her all his tricks. She had saved everything, thinking it was impressive that her boyfriend was so smart with money. She made a TikTok video, nothing dramatic, just a story about dating someone who turned out to be a fraud. She didn't use real names, but included fleeting images of those receipts. The video spread quickly in our local circle, and James's former colleagues recognized the expense report format. Meanwhile, I had a small victory of my own. Remember that joint Amazon account that James kept trying to regain access to? I discovered he had used it to buy gifts for Aurora while we were still together, so I did something petty but satisfying. I returned everything that was still within the return window. The money was refunded to my card since I was the original purchaser. The best part, he didn't even notice until Amazon sent him those rate your purchase emails. I had been an A+ Amazon customer for years, so the return processes were easy. By the time James discovered it, all the items he bought for Aurora had gone back to Amazon's warehouse and the refunds had been processed. Tablet, necklace, even a set of books I'd never seen in our home, all went back and the money refunded directly to my new bank account. Nearly $800. Not a huge amount in the bigger picture, but it was a small win that I appreciated. But here's where things got really good. Yesterday I was at Target buying some storage bins, trying to organize my new place, when I ran into James's sister, Katie. Instead of being awkward, she actually hugged me and shared some inside information. He borrowed money from mom and dad, she said, shaking her head. Claimed it was for investment opportunities. But they found out he used it to maintain his fake lifestyle with that girl. James's parents discovered this during a family dinner last weekend, all thanks to Aurora's TikTok finding its way to James's mother's Facebook feed. There was a big scene at Olive Garden. James's father was so angry he took back their spare house key, where James was now staying, since Aurora had kicked him out of their apartment. James's reaction to all this? Complete meltdown. He started texting everyone, trying to control the damage, creating new Instagram accounts to harass Aurora, even showing up at his parents' house at midnight to beg them to understand his side. The karma train wasn't done yet. Remember how he always insisted on managing our shared cloud storage because I was too disorganized? I finally logged into it last week to download some old photos, and I discovered a folder full of screenshots of his conversations with Aurora from when they first started dating, including some choice messages about their plans after he left me. I didn't even need to do anything with them. I just forwarded everything to my divorce lawyer. Janet, my lawyer, actually laughed and said, "This is making my job very easy." It seems James had inadvertently stored evidence against himself, because he never imagined I would be smart enough to find and use it. Aurora did a follow-up TikTok yesterday. This time she showed the fake Tiffany ring, complete with screenshots of the shady website where James had purchased it. The video has gotten quite popular, with 50,000 views. James tried to come to my new workplace to talk about all this, sincerely begging me to help fix his reputation. Security didn't even let him into the building. The security camera footage of him in the lobby that day has become a source of amusement in our office. Last night, I did something quite petty. I changed all our streaming service passwords, one by one, while watching James's Ring camera notifications explode as he tried to access each account. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, even his precious ESPN+. By the third notification, I was actually laughing. His dream car, the Tesla Model 3 that he had leased to impress Aurora, far beyond our budget, by the way, was repossessed this morning from the Motel 6 parking lot where he's been staying since Aurora kicked him out. I sat in my car, drinking coffee from the Dunkin' Donuts across the street, and watched the whole scene unfold. It wasn't my plan. I had just stopped for coffee on my way to work and happened to witness that perfect moment. Sometimes the universe really is fair. It's been 6 months since that fateful day when James called me a useless wife and said I would beg him to come back within a week. The divorce is finally official. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, just paperwork and lawyers in a bland, dimly lit office. James was there, looking rough and tired. He was still wearing the same Nordstrom dress shirt he had once proudly flaunted, but now it was wrinkled and slightly tight. It seems the fitness influencer lifestyle he had pursued with Aurora hadn't lasted very long. Aurora had left him a month before, not with a bang or another viral TikTok. She simply moved back to her parents' suburban home when she realized James couldn't continue to impress her with expensive dinners and pricey gifts. She tried to message me on Instagram one last time to explain, but I just left the message on read. Some stories don't need an ending, they just need to end. James is now renting a room in a shared house across town. The Tesla is long gone, and he's driving an old Honda, a car very similar to the one he once mocked me for wanting because it was too basic. The only assets he was able to keep were his clothes and the gaming console. I'm still working my customer service job, but I got a small raise, $5 an hour, not life-changing, but it's something. I've learned to do my own taxes through TurboTax. It wasn't the complex mystery James always said it was. I ran into his mother at Target last week. We were both shopping for home decor in the same aisle. Instead of avoiding each other, we actually talked. James tried to borrow money from us again, she said, shaking her head. We refused. He needs to grow up. She helped me pick out some inexpensive but nice-looking throw pillows for my studio apartment, and we parted with a hug. The apartment finally feels like home. I bought some plants from Home Depot, 2 out of 3 are still alive. Learned to cook basic meals through HelloFresh. I've even started going to Planet Fitness on weekends, not because of James or Aurora or anyone else, but because I want to feel healthy. Nothing fancy, just normal life things, which I previously thought I couldn't do on my own. James still tries to contact me through new Instagram accounts every few weeks, usually when he's been drinking, with messages like "you'll regret this" or "you can't survive without me." I just block and delete. The funny part, I found his old password list in our shared Google Drive. Yes, he kept it in a document literally titled Passwords. I didn't do anything with it, just forwarded it to his sister, Katie, so she could tell him to change everything since we both knew he was still using those passwords. I've met a guy named Matthew at work. Nothing serious, we just have lunch in the break room sometimes. He's also recently divorced and understands why I'm not ready for anything real. We just went to a movie last week, a silly comedy that James would have hated, but we laughed a lot. I think the most important thing I've learned from all of this is that I'm not useless as James claimed. I'm perfectly capable. I can take care of myself. I can build a new life, a life I like, a life that doesn't have to revolve around pleasing someone who's never really satisfied. Yesterday, I happened to run into James at Planet Fitness. He didn't recognize me at first. I've changed quite a bit. My hair is longer, I've gone back to my natural color, and I'm visibly happier. When he finally saw me, he stood there for a moment, just staring, as if he couldn't believe it was me. I just smiled and nodded, then continued with my workout. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to prove anything. Last week, I found our old wedding photos while cleaning. The girl in those photos, trying so hard to be what he wanted, I barely recognize her now. I put them in a box and tucked it away in the closet. Not because I want to forget, but because I've learned from the experience. I never want to be that person again, someone trying to please a person who cannot be pleased. On Friday, I deposited my paycheck as I do every 2 weeks. Yes, I still like to do it in person. The teller was the same one who helped me open my own account 6 months ago, when I was shaking and afraid. "You look happier," she said, smiling warmly. "I am happier," I replied, and it was true. James was right about one thing: I couldn't survive without him. I thrived.